My name is Eleanor Whitfield, and I was born in the year of our Lord 1771, during a thunderstorm that shook the very rafters of our small cottage at the edge of Oak Ridge, Virginia. I often think that storm must have settled into my bones, for I have always known struggle, and have grown used to the sound of trouble at the door. My parents, Thomas and Margaret Whitfield, were not born into riches. My father came from a long line of woodsmen and trappers, men who knew the land as well as they knew their faces. My mother, before illness took her laughter and strength, was the kindest soul I ever knew, a woman who could coax wild roses to bloom even in rocky soil, and who could calm any storm inside or out. By the time I was 21, however, our world had changed much, and not for the better. The Whitfield cottage sat at the very edge of the forest, a gray stone building with a sagging roof, 2 narrow windows, and a stubborn chimney that smoked no matter how carefully I tended the fire. We had always been poor, but my father's age came upon him quickly after the harsh winter of 1790. His back bent, his hands stiffened, and the woods that had once been his pride became an enemy he could no longer tame. My mother, once the heart of our home, took to her bed in late autumn the year I turned 20, never again able to rise without pain. That left me, the only child, to see us through the cruel tides of fortune. There was no one else, no brothers or sisters, no kindly relatives with spare dollars to send, no neighbors near enough or rich enough to offer more than a loaf of bread now and again. Each day before dawn, I would wrap myself in my father's old hunting cloak, take up his battered axe so heavy it seemed almost an enemy itself, and step into the cool hush of the Virginia woods. I learned to walk silently, to read the language of the trees and the undergrowth, to know where the best fallen limbs could be found without angering the spirits of the living forest. My father had taught me well before his hands grew twisted with age. Sometimes, as I worked, I could still hear his voice beside me guiding my swing, reminding me to respect the woods, to take only what we needed and to leave the rest. I worked until my arms ached and my palms blistered, gathering enough wood to fill our rickety cart, then made the long trek into Richmond. The road to Richmond was rough and winding, passing through groves of towering oaks and over muddy streams, then through the farms and fields that lined the outskirts of the city. The journey took half a day if I hurried, more if the cart's wheel wobbled or the rains turned the roads to soup. Often I arrived covered in dust or mud, my hair a tangled mess beneath my bonnet, my skirts stained with sweat and earth. The city was a world apart from Oak Ridge. The air was thick with the scent of horses, fresh bread, and the river, and the shouts of merchants and hawkers rang from every street corner. I would set up my small pile of wood near the bakery on Jefferson Street, close enough to catch the early shoppers. Sometimes a kind-hearted baker's wife, Mrs. Hewitt, would come by and buy an armload for a few cents more than I asked, tucking a warm roll into my hand with a wink. The blacksmith, Mr. Carmichael, always greeted me with a nod and paid in hard silver dollars, never haggling though I knew he could have. Still, even with these kindnesses, the coins I earned were never enough. Each night, as I counted my earnings, perhaps $3 or $4 if luck was with me, I would sigh, knowing how quickly it would disappear into the grocer's purse, the doctor's hand, or the rent we owed on our small patch of land. Sometimes I resented the weight of it all. My friends from childhood, the few who had not gone north to Philadelphia or west in search of new lives, spoke of marriage and parties and the latest fashions from Europe. I had not been to a party in years, nor could I spare the money for a single ribbon. My mother, when she was well, would try to ease my mind, telling me that the Lord would not test us beyond what we could bear, and that in every trial there was a purpose. Still, it was hard not to wonder what my life might have been if I'd been born to a different family, in a different place. Our home life was quiet and slow. I did all the work that needed doing, chopping and stacking wood, mending clothes, tending our tiny garden, cooking plain meals of beans or porridge, and bathing my mother as gently as I could. My father, though frail, still tried to help. He would whittle little animals from scraps of wood to amuse me, or sit by the fire in the evenings, telling tales of his youth, of the time he trapped a wolf with his bare hands, or the night he saw the northern lights on a hunting trip in Pennsylvania. I loved those stories, but they always left me with a hollow ache, knowing those days were gone and would never come again. As the winter of 1792 deepened, The cold seemed to settle into every crack and corner of our cottage. There were nights when the wind howled so fiercely that I feared our roof might lift off entirely, and mornings when I woke to find the water in the basin frozen solid. I could see the worry in my parents' eyes, though they tried to hide it. There were times when I had to choose between buying medicine for my mother or enough flour to make bread for a week. Those were the hardest days, when every dollar counted and every meal was a triumph of will. Despite everything, I tried to hold on to hope. On Sundays, I would walk to the little church at the edge of the village, where Reverend Aldridge would speak of perseverance and faith. I found comfort there, not just in his words but in the gentle faces of the people around me, each of them fighting their own battles, each of them surviving in their way. I think it was hope, more than anything, that kept me going through those dark days. Hope, and the stubborn belief that life must have something more in store for me than endless toil and quiet desperation. And it was on one such day, as I sat beneath the ancient oaks after hours of hard work, my hands rough and aching, my heart heavy with worry, that I saw something that would change the course of my life forever. The memory of that day has never faded from my mind, no matter how many years have passed. Even now, when the wind howls through the pines or the sky darkens with storm clouds, I find myself returning to that moment when chance or fate delivered a secret into my keeping. It began as an ordinary morning, though I remember the sky was a heavy, somber gray, with low clouds pressing down on the hills, as if the heavens themselves wished to keep secrets hidden. After hauling my bundle of wood to the city and selling it for a paltry sum, I returned home more weary than usual. The roads were slick with last night's rain, and my boots were caked in mud by the time I reached the edge of the forest. I should have gone straight to our cottage to tend to my parents, but something in me, perhaps that same stubbornness that kept me working, longed for a few moments alone. I wandered into the deep woods, following the familiar path to an old clearing I favored, where a great slab of granite, half covered in moss and wild fern, jutted from the earth like the prow of a sunken ship. I sat with my back pressed against the cool stone, letting my eyes close and my mind drifts for just a moment. The world was hushed, no birdsong, no sound but the wind whispering through the trees. Suddenly, the peace was shattered by the distant thunder of hooves, growing louder with every heartbeat. My first instinct was to bolt for cover, but curiosity rooted me to the spot. Carefully, I inched around the boulder and peered through the thick ferns. From the narrow forest track emerged 4 men, each astride a large black stallion, their forms shrouded in heavy wool cloaks that snapped in the wind. Even from my hiding place, I could sense the menace in the way they carried themselves, their shoulders square, their eyes darting warily as they surveyed the clearing. I recognized none of them, though there was something oddly familiar in the set of their jaws and the grim lines of their faces. These were not local men, not farmers or villagers. They were outlaws, the kind my father had once warned me about on stormy nights when the wind rattled the shutters. The horsemen dismounted in a single, fluid motion, moving with the sort of silent discipline that spoke of long practice together. I held my breath, afraid even the slightest sound might give me away. They gathered around the my granite slab, I thought with a strange pang of possessiveness, and with surprising ease set their shoulders on it. Muscles bulged beneath the coarse fabric, and slowly, inch by inch, the massive stone shifted. I stared in disbelief, for I had tried many times to move that very rock, even just a little, and never succeeded. Yet here they were, rolling it aside as if it weighed no more than a bundle of wood. Beneath the stone, a black hole gaped in the earth, a narrow entrance, dark as midnight. One by one, the men slipped inside, ducking their heads as they vanished from view. For a long moment, the only sounds were the snorts and stamps of the restless horses and the wind rustling in the leaves. I crouched lower, pressing myself into the damp earth, my heart hammering so loudly I was certain the horses would hear. Time lost all meaning as I waited, motionless and breathless. Minutes could have passed, or an hour, I cannot say. I watched the shifting light and tried to guess what those men were doing inside the hill. I thought of all the stories I'd ever heard about highwaymen and robbers, of ambush on lonely roads, of gold stolen from royal coaches, of treasures spirited away to be hidden deep in the earth. Could it be true, here in my wild corner of Virginia? At last the men emerged, crawling from the darkness one by one. Their faces were smeared with dirt, their cloaks dusted with cobwebs and fragments of stone. I noticed now that each carried a bulging leather sack, and as they walked, the sacks clinked and jangled with the unmistakable sound of coins and metal. They moved quickly, their voices low and urgent as they restored the stone to its place. When they finished, they mounted their horses without a backward glance, spurred the beasts to a gallop, and thundered back the way they had come. Only when the sounds of hooves had faded entirely did I dare to move. My hands were shaking as I crept from my hiding place and approached the great rock. My heart raced as I examined the ground where they had worked, half expecting to see nothing at all, to discover I had only dreamed the whole thing. But there, at the very edge of the slab, something bright caught my eye. I knelt down and brushed aside the loose soil. My fingers closed around a heavy coin, thick and old, its face worn by years of handling. When I wiped away the dirt, I gasped. There, staring up at me, was the profile of King George, surrounded by words I could barely make out. It was gold, real gold, unlike any coin I had ever seen in my life. I stared at it in wonder, its weight solid and cold in my palm. At that moment, 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind. Where had these men come from? And what were they hiding in the depths of the earth? How long had this secret cave lain beneath my favorite rock, waiting for someone to discover it? I thought of the stories my father had told me of lost treasures from the days of the Revolution, of fortunes spirited away by outlaws and never found. For the first time in my life, I felt the dizzying thrill of possibility, mingled with a cold prickle of fear. I looked back at our small, crumbling cottage in the distance. Our poverty, our hunger, my parents' suffering all seemed suddenly small and far away, replaced by a new wild hope. If there was gold in that cave, if there was treasure enough to fill those heavy sacks, then maybe, just maybe, I could change everything. Perhaps the Lord, in his mysterious wisdom, had placed this secret in my path as a test or a blessing. But as I stood there, clutching the coin, I also felt the chill of danger. Those men would not take kindly to anyone meddling with their secrets. I knew in my bones that I had stumbled onto something perilous, a world of thieves and hidden wealth, where a single mistake could mean ruin or worse. Still, as I slipped the gold coin into my pocket and hurried home through the gathering dusk, my mind burned with plans and questions. I promised myself that I would not rest until I learned the truth about the cave beneath Oak Ridge Hill, and what treasures or terrors might lie waiting in the darkness below. For 3 days after my discovery, I could hardly sleep for the pounding of my heart and the racing of my thoughts. I spent each daylight hour pretending at my usual chores, chopping wood, tending the small garden, nursing my mother, while inside I felt changed, as if I were living in 2 worlds at once. In the world my parents saw, I was still the weary daughter who struggled to bring home a few dollars. In the other secret world, I was a watcher at the edge of adventure, with the weight of a golden coin always in my apron pocket to remind me it was real. During those days, I took every opportunity to slip away to the woods, careful not to arouse suspicion. I watched the old granite slab from a distance, hidden among ferns and tangled brush. I dared not go near, for fear the thieves might return, but I could not stay away entirely. Each rustle of leaves, each distant snap of a twig, sent shivers up my spine, yet I waited, determined to learn the pattern of the outlaws' comings and goings. On the 3rd evening, just as the sun set and the first stars pricked the sky, I sensed that something was different. The forest was alive with restless energy, and the air seemed to thrum with tension. I tucked my hair beneath my shawl and crept to my hiding place, settling in for what might be a long vigil. The moon rose, round and bright, casting silver light across the clearing and painting the ancient stone in ghostly hues. My patience was rewarded just before midnight, when the distant thunder of hooves sounded again, louder and heavier than before. My heart leaped into my throat as I counted 1, 2, 3, all the way to 10 horsemen, their faces hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats and dark cloaks. They moved with purpose, their voices low and harsh as they circled the great stone. Together they set their shoulders to it, and with a deep grinding groan, rolled it aside once more. This time they moved quickly, ducking into the darkness one by one. their torches flickering and vanishing down into the earth. I pressed myself into the moss and did not dare breathe. I waited as the minutes crawled by, the moon climbing higher overhead, my limbs numb from cold and tension. At last the men re-emerged, their sacks slung over their backs, their faces set in grim lines. They restored the stone to its resting place and rode off, their horses' hooves pounding into the night. I waited until I was certain the thieves were gone before daring to approach. My legs trembled as I crept from my hiding place and felt along the stone's edge. By a stroke of fortune, the thieves had not rolled the slab entirely back into position, leaving a narrow gap just wide enough for a small person to slip through. I hesitated only a moment, then took a deep breath and squeezed myself into the darkness, praying I would not be caught. Inside, the passage was narrow and low, forcing me to crouch as I crept forward. The air was cold and thick, laced with the smell of damp earth and something metallic. My heart hammered in my ears as I felt my way through the darkness, the rough stone scraping my knuckles. I fumbled for the lantern I had brought, an old tin thing half full of oil, and struck a match, shielding the flame with my hand until it caught. The glow revealed a tunnel that snaked deep into the hill, the walls pressed in close on either side. I followed its winding path, one slow step at a time, until at last the passage opened into a vast, vaulted chamber, a true treasure room, like something from a legend or a king's tale. My breath caught in my throat at the sight. Barrels overflowing with gold coins lined the walls, their contents spilling onto the dirt floor in bright, glinting rivers. Chests, some open, some locked, were filled with silver goblets, strings of pearls, and jewels that sparkled in the lantern light. Here and there I glimpsed artifacts, even stranger Spanish doubloons, English pounds, silver candlesticks, and even a carved ivory chess set. For a long moment I simply stood and stared, the lantern trembling in my hand. The riches before me seemed enough to feed 100 families for a lifetime. I thought of my mother's thin face, my father's bent shoulders, the ache of hunger that haunted our days. I was dizzy with awe and, yes, terror. I knew then that I could not take much or linger long. The thieves would surely return, and if they caught me here, my fate would be sealed. Desperate to avoid being trapped, I turned to search the chamber for another way out. Behind a stack of crates, I discovered a low, crumbling tunnel so small that only someone as slight as I could possibly squeeze through. With a prayer, I wriggled inside, dragging the lantern behind me. The tunnel twisted and narrowed, rocks tearing at my skirt and skin. Just as I began to fear I would be trapped forever, the tunnel widened, and I emerged at the edge of a bramble thicket not far from my cottage. My relief was so great, I nearly wept. That night, I hardly slept, haunted by dreams of gold and danger. But by the first light of dawn, I had resolved what I must do. If I was careful, if I worked only at night, carrying only what I could hide, I might move enough treasure to change my family's life without ever drawing suspicion. For 3 nights, I crept back and forth between the treasure room and our cottage, carrying pouches of coins and jewels beneath my cloak. Each trip was agony and ecstasy in equal measure. My nerves were strung tight as violin strings, but I forced myself to be cautious, hiding my spoils beneath the loose floorboards in the kitchen and covering the gaps with old rugs. Every time I heard a distant noise, I froze, certain the thieves had discovered my theft and would come for me. But luck, or providence, was on my side. When I finally saw the bandits return on the 4th night, I watched from the shadows as they raged and shouted, their voices echoing through the hills. They tore apart the treasure room, searched the woods, and even rode into town demanding answers. But they never once suspected the poor woodsman's daughter, the girl who sold firewood in the marketplace, had outwitted them and made off with their treasure. I kept my secret close, telling no one, not even my parents. Each night, as I drifted into uneasy sleep, I knew my life would never be the same. For the first time, I dared to dream of a future free from hunger and fear, a future I would shape myself, with courage and cunning, beneath the silent watch of the old Oak Ridge Hill, with the last pouch of gold safely hidden beneath our cottage's floorboards. I finally allowed myself to imagine a different life, a life without the daily ache of hunger, without the constant shadow of worry from my parents, without the fear that each winter might be our last. For nights on end I lay awake, the golden coin I had first found warm in my hand, thinking of what I might do with my impossible fortune. I knew that sudden wealth could draw attention as surely as a flame draws moths, and so my first concern was secrecy. The thieves had been clever, but desperation had made me cleverer still. If I was careful, if I acted with patience and wisdom, perhaps I could do good in the world and never fall under suspicion. My first steps were cautious. I waited until the city was abuzz with market day, when travelers and merchants flooded the streets and a new face might go unnoticed. I dressed in my plainest clothing, an old gray dress, and a faded shawl that once belonged to my mother, and walked to Richmond as if I were just another servant girl running errands for her mistress. When I reached the city, I made my way to the office of a kindly land agent, Mr. Lawless, whose name I had overheard in the marketplace. With trembling hands, I inquired after a modest house for sale, one with an orchard, if possible, and a little plot for a kitchen garden. Mr. Lawless seemed surprised that a young woman would come alone to inquire after such a property. But when I produced a handful of golden coins, his surprise softened into a broad and eager smile. I had done my research, listening closely to the merchants and gossip, and I knew just what a handsome brick house near the edge of the city should cost. $200, miss, Mr. Lawless said, with a glance at the coins in my hand. And worth every penny. I nodded, pretending at reluctance, and agreed. Within a week the deed was signed and the house was mine. It was not grand by the standards of the Richmond gentry, but to me it was a palace, a two-story brick house, its windows shining in the sun, with a wide porch and a tidy garden bursting with late summer vegetables. The orchard behind the house was tangled and overgrown, but I could see, even in the fading light of autumn, the promise of apples and cherries and pears come spring. I could hardly believe my good fortune, and I wept openly as I led my parents through the front door. They asked no questions, only gazed in wonder at the gleaming wood floors and the warmth of the kitchen hearth. I told them only that I had been saving every penny for years, and that Providence had finally smiled upon us. They chose to believe me, and for that I was grateful. Settling into our new home was like waking from a long, cold dream. My mother regained some of her old strength, sitting by the window to embroider or reading aloud from the battered Bible she had carried since girlhood. My father found work as a caretaker for a nearby orchard, his back stiff but his spirits high. For the first time in my life, I could buy fresh bread and sweet butter without counting every coin. I bought my mother a new shawl and my father a warm winter coat. Yet even as I reveled in our newfound comfort, I could not forget the faces I saw each day, the hungry children on the street corners, the war widows begging for scraps, the tired men sleeping in doorways with nothing but newspapers for blankets. Their suffering echoed my past, and I could not rest while I had the means to help. I decided that my fortune, ill-gotten as it may have been, must serve a greater good. On moonless nights, wrapped in borrowed shawls and bonnets, I moved quietly through Richmond's poorer quarters, leaving small sacks of gold and silver coins on the stoops of cottages where I knew hardship dwelled. I remembered the stories I had heard in the market of widows too proud to beg, of orphans who had no shoes, of families whose debts threatened to swallow them whole. To Mrs. Hopkins, whose husband had died in the war, I paid off the mortgage on her tiny house and left a basket of food at her door. For the children who lingered by the river, hungry and wild-eyed, I sent bags of flour and jars of sweet preserves, along with enough coins to buy them boots for winter. Sometimes I would watch from the shadows as a mother discovered the gift and fell to her knees in gratitude. The joy and relief in their faces were worth far more than the gold itself, and I felt as if I had been blessed with a secret kind of grace. Of course I was careful, always careful. I sold the treasure in small portions, exchanging coins and jewels at different shops so as not to attract suspicion. I never spent too lavishly at once, and I kept my name out of all business that did not concern our family directly. The gold lasted longer than I had dared hope, and every time I thought it was nearly gone, I discovered a new hiding place beneath the floorboards, a new pouch tucked away in some forgotten corner of the cave. It was as though the treasure itself wished to do good, to right the wrongs that had brought it into the hands of thieves. As for the cave beneath Oakridge Hill, I left it undisturbed after those first fevered nights. The great stone slab, which had once seemed so impossible to move, became simply another part of the landscape, its secrets safe and silent. I never saw the band of thieves again, nor did anyone in the village speak of them. Perhaps they rode north, broken by the loss of their hoard, or perhaps they turned to honest work, chastened by fate. I could only hope that justice, in its quiet way, had been served. The years passed, and our lives became gentle and good. My parents grew old in comfort, and I became known in Richmond for my kindness and charity, though few knew the true source of my fortune. I never married, nor did I long for it. My heart was too full with the happiness of giving and with the satisfaction of having shaped my destiny with my own hands. Sometimes, as I walked beneath the apple trees in our orchard or watched the sun set over the hills, I would think back to the frightened, desperate girl I had been, the girl who sold wood in the market, who had stumbled upon a secret that changed everything. And so this is my tale, a story of hardship and courage, of shadows and golden dreams, of how a poor woodsman's daughter became, for a little while, a legend in old Virginia. Only I ever truly knew the secret of the treasure under Oak Ridge Hill. And in my heart I have always believed that it was meant not just for me, but for all those whose lives it touched along the way.